Hitler, seemingly the Iron Man of World War II, has officially invaded Poland. He has called England and France's bluff. He has outsmarted them with the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact, and he launches into World War II, not really believing it would actually cause a world war. He literally invades Poland on September 1st, 1939. Historians call this the official beginning of World War II, which really goes against my little thesis of Japan started fighting in 1931. Not considered the World War because it's not Eurocentric. Asians killing Asians, nobody cared about that. But important to understand because by the time Japan bombs Pearl Harbor, they've been at war for 10 years. They were a country fighting for resources that had few resources, use up resources for 10 years, and then decide to fight America. Which, on the surface, always sounds dumb that they attacked us at all, but it explains why they attacked us in the manner they attacked us. They tried to punch us in the nose and knock us out of the fight before we even knew we were in the war. So anyway, back to Hitler. Invading Poland. Poland had the finest cavalry in Europe in 1939. Now think about what cavalry means. They had the finest soldiers on horseback, holding lances and long pikes in 1939. Poland was woefully unprepared for what was about to hit them. And what hit them was a thing called blitzkrieg, which is the German word for lightning war. Remember, Hitler was in World War I. Goering was in World War I. Rommel, Hitler's great general, was in World War I. They all learned from the lessons of World War I. And this will apply to a lot of American commanders too. Patton and a guy named Billy Mitchell, they were World War I veterans who came home from World War I saying, airplanes and tanks, airplanes and tanks, airplanes or tanks going to be the next big thing. Billy Mitchell pushed it so hard he was actually arrested and court-martialed for defying his superiors, and Patton got the hint real quick and accepted a post in an obscure Pennsylvania military base where he got to play tanks with 4 or 5 guys in a couple trucks. Because America never planned on going to war again. Goering rose with Hitler, constantly whispering in Hitler's ear, airplanes will win the next big war. Rommel stays in the military after World War I, becomes the premier tank expert of the world, literally doing my hands in a way that planting seeds for the future. Rommel literally writes the book on tank warfare between World War I and World War II. Literally wrote the textbook. If you went to military school, you studied Erwin Rommel's book on tanks. Hitler was there. Hitler was in the trenches of World War I for 4 years. He understood that trench warfare was horrifying and not effective. He was a victim of gas attacks, and even as evil as Hitler is, he is so anti-World War I tactics that he will not allow the use of gas against his enemy combatants in World War II. I chose my words carefully there. I said enemy combatants. He respected the English and the French, since they were originally of German stock enough, that he would not use poison gas against them. Now, of course he used poison gases in the Holocaust and the concentration camps, but keep in mind he didn't consider those people to be equal human beings. And so these guys all put their heads together and come up with new tactics for World War II. The Blitzkrieg. There's an axiom in when you study war and military history. Every country is always prepared for the last war. You learn your lessons from the war you're in, and you correct your lessons, and by golly, the next time a war comes, you are ready for that. Unfortunately, the next war is always different from the previous war. For instance, at this very same time as France was preparing to defend against Hitler, they built concrete trenches and concrete artillery emplacements and built an impregnable wall called the Maginot Line to prevent the Germans from ever invading them again, as they had in 1870 in the Franco-Prussian War and in 1914 with World War I. Concrete trenches. Meanwhile, Hitler's thinking trenches are the dumbest thing ever invented by mankind. He gets together with Goering and they build a massive air force. An air force so, not just massive, but so impressive that they invited Charles Lindbergh, the most famous person on Earth in the 1930s. They invite him over to take a look. Lindbergh comes home shaking his head telling America, we never want to tangle with the Germans. You do not want to fight these people. You will lose. Their air forces are so great. Because their new concept of war is, we'll just fly right over the enemy trenches. And we will bomb their cities, and we'll bomb their mom's house, we'll bomb their schools, their nursing homes, their hospitals, their civilian populations, and leave the soldiers in the trenches thinking, oh my gosh, what's happening to my poor mother? And about the time he's thinking that, Rommel's tanks are going to show up. Rommel's been whispering in Hitler's ear, tanks are the next great weapon. You can just roll right over your enemy's trenches, especially if they're concrete. They're only stuck in the mud. And so then, the enemy soldiers getting ran over, and by the time the survivors realize what's going on, the German army shows up third and kills them. This is a whole new style of warfare. Or is it? Remember talking about Ulysses S. Grant and his soulmate, William Tecumseh Sherman, in the Civil War, who took the war in a bloody rampage in the South. Sherman's March to the Sea. Those guys were years ahead of their time. Destroy the civilian population of your enemy behind the lines, and the morale of the soldiers will just wither away. And so Hitler blitzkriegs Poland on September 1st of 1939. He hits the finest cavalry in Europe with the best airplanes and then tanks and infantry of Europe, and destroys his half of Poland in 2 weeks. 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. I've been running this theme for a long time. I'm always really planting hints to the bigger picture. We talked about the 100 Years' War and the 30 Years' War and the 7 Years' War, and the Wars of the Roses went on for 27 years. War used to be such a long thing, and then the Industrial Revolution comes along. We talked about the Civil War. It was only 4 years long, but killed 500,000 people in 4 years. And then we talked about the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, where Germany used industry to conquer the French in 6 weeks in 1870. Well, it's 1939 now. Huge advances in transportation, communication, and war. 2 weeks it takes to conquer Poland. And much to Hitler's surprise, England and France actually declare war on him. They stood behind their pledge, they drew their line in the sand, and they're going to stand up and fight Hitler. This has all kinds of effects. It starts World War II. It also allows Hitler to always say, until the day of his death, he's always going to say that he did not start World War II. England and France declared war on him. He just wanted to go fight the dirty Russians who were communists and had stabbed England and France in the back, and it really made no logical sense that England and France would want to help the Russians. Turns out England and France did have the guts to stand up to Hitler, to defend the Polish. It's probably more a matter of England and France just realized Germany is scary and Germany's powerful, and if Hitler's allowed to carry out his plan of taking on the Russians and wins, then Germany will become a hugely scarier force in the world. Not necessarily that they had to fight, but it's not in England and France's self-interest to allow for a big, scary, powerful Germany. So they actually declare war. Hitler finishes off Poland with his blitzkrieg, swings those tanks around, and hits France, and it takes him 6 weeks to conquer the French. Here's a classic picture of Hitler and all of his cronies under the Eiffel Tower. Blitzkriegs France. There's a classic selfie of Hitler under the Eiffel Tower. France surrenders in 6 weeks. The French government literally gets together and they just don't know what to do, and they all vote to surrender to Hitler, who drags them. This is a special treat for Mr. Weber. He was mentioning this a lot. Hitler takes them to the same spot on the railroad track and takes the exact same railroad car and forces France to sign this surrender in the same railroad car at the same spot on the track where Germany signed the armistice on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918 to end World War I. Hitler he shoves France down in style. Only one French leader refuses, and that is Charles de Gaulle, who flees France and makes his way to England and will claim to be the legitimate government of France for the rest of the war. Meanwhile, the French aren't real proud of this aspect of their history. Meanwhile, the rest of the French government actually officially joins Germany as an ally in World War II. Now, it's under duress, it's with a gun to their head. Hitler's literally saying, sign this and join me, or I'll melt the Eiffel Tower into tank parts, and I will draw a mustache on the Mona Lisa. France didn't have much of a choice in the matter, but it does complicate things that our friend France suddenly is pitted against us in the future of World War II. So, Poland's out of it, the Russians are waiting for the 10-year time limit, and France surrenders in 1940. This leaves our friend England, who shows up to help the French just in time for the French to surrender, which leads to the miracle of Dunkirk. It's hard to explain just how important Dunkirk is. 338,000 British soldiers show up on the shores of France. They're ready to go to war, just like World War I. The English and the French, side by side, they're going to hold those Germans back. And as soon as the 338,000 German soldiers are off the boats are sailing away, France surrenders. These soldiers are literally yelling to the boats, come back, and the British Navy is basically saying, nice knowing you, we can't come back. Applying everything you've ever learned about British history. England has not been invaded successfully since 1066 because they are an island. They've never really had a strong army. They've always depended on the Navy. The Navy continues to sail away for fear if they go back to pick up those soldiers, the German airplanes show up and sink the entire British Navy, which basically dooms Great Britain, England, the UK for the entire war. That they will lose. If they lose their Navy, they realize they lose the war. So the British Navy is basically willing to abandon the entire British Army in World War II, which is terrible, just horrifying. The Army holds back the Germans as best they can. The real miracle here, this is totally unexplainable, except that Hitler's tanks have been on the move. They went to Poland, then they totally recrossed Germany, and they conquered the French in 6 weeks. Now, just as they're poised to destroy the British Navy, Hitler suddenly says, you know what, boys, take a break. I guess it's safe to assume that Hitler believed the German army was just stuck, that he had a few days to give his tank crews a rest, and then he would smoke the British army from the face of the earth. His mistake, what they really call the miracle of Dunkirk, is he doesn't calculate the British people into this deal. For some unexplainable, miraculous reason, the British people take it upon themselves. If the British Navy won't go save the British Army, the people jump in their boats, their yachts, their pleasure craft, their shrimp boats, their fishing boats, any little boat they had. They just take it upon themselves to sail the 30 miles across the English Channel, pick up a few British soldiers, and haul them back to England and just make trips back and forth. Ships small enough that the German aircraft weren't that effective against them, and they save 338,000 British soldiers this way. You can't put this into words. You just can't. I'm going to try to put up a supplemental documentary just on Dunkirk. I got some neat little videos that are about 25 minutes long, if I can make it work technologically. There's some copyright issues that always make it a problem to use these videos. But if you can imagine regular people, just regular people in the modern day world, it'd be jet skis and ski boats zipping across the English Channel to save 338,000, a third of a million British soldiers are saved. Another strategy that you might use if you want to learn more about Dunkirk, there's a great movie called Dunkirk. Um, that really shows the suspense that England went through for these 3 or 4 days that it takes. England wasn't sure they're going to be able to save their army or not, and by some miracle, they do. Now, of course, Hitler's reaction to this is he is absolutely furious. This is one of the ironies of Hitler. He stopped the tanks from destroying the British army. They saw no way they could escape. They escaped. And so he's super duper crazy angry because he made a mistake. This is one of the mistakes that will cost Hitler World War II. Um, Now England has an army to defend themselves with when it comes time to invade England. And it all leads to the really, really famous Battle of Britain. Um, as we've said, if you've had me in history classes, you've heard this 1,000 times. England not successfully invaded since 1066. England always keeps a powerful navy so that nobody can invade them. Napoleon wanted to, his never had to pull it off because he lost his navy at the Battle of Trafalgar. The Germans in World War One, they tried to break out of the British blockade at the Battle of Jutland, which you labeled on a map previously because I was planting seeds. Unable to break out against the British Navy. It's why they turned to submarines in World War One. So they go under the British Navy. Hitler believes he can defy history because he has new technology. He's got the airplane. Hermann Goering, his air guy, convinces Hitler you don't have to necessarily invade England. You can bomb England into submission. If you send German bombers over and destroy the British capacity to wage war, you can force them to surrender or weaken them enough that you will be able to successfully invade England. You get air superiority, and you'll probably be able to invade England. And so they start this epic, epic, epic battle, the Battle of Britain. England is outnumbered, they don't have many pilots, they don't have many planes, and the Germans just start bombing and bombing and bombing and bombing and bombing England. Germany had the upper hand at first. They were bombing the British airfields and the British air bases, destroying British airplanes, destroying British pilots. They were hitting the factories where England could not produce more planes and munitions. When you really get into World War II, you hear the term ball bearings a lot. This is a bone for anybody out there really into cars, doing mechanical stuff. No engine, no mechanical device works, whether it's an airplane, automobile, or railroad. You cannot live without ball bearings. So you bomb the ball bearing factories during World War II. And Germany just bombs and bombs and bombs and bombs. And Hitler has England by the throat. Now, England does have the advantage. They've elected, finally, a new prime minister, Winston Churchill, who is the Teddy Roosevelt of England. He's a little older than Teddy Roosevelt, but he was a big piece of the progressive era. In some ways, he goes beyond Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt was the first American president up in an airplane. Winston Churchill wouldn't quit until he could fly an airplane. Winston Churchill had gone off as a cavalry officer in his youth to India, serving the British Empire, and volunteered for every little war he'd get into, just like Teddy Roosevelt volunteered to go to the Spanish-American War. Churchill really couldn't afford to be in the cavalry, so he had to buy your own horses and food, and so he starts writing and using his education and his journalism skills, and ends up as a journalist in the Boer War, which is a complicated thing of basically England fighting Dutch colonists in the middle of Africa. And Churchill's captured in the Boer War. He's on a locomotive, they fall into an ambush, he picks up a rifle and throws out his pen, he's fighting the Boers, he gets the train moving, he saves some people, but he and a lot of guys are actually captured and thrown into a prisoner of war camp, where they devise an escape from the middle of the depths of Africa. The outhouse, the prisoner of war camp, is right by the fence, so he and 3 guys decide, well, one by one, in the night, we'll go use the outhouse, and if you climb on top of the outhouse, you can jump the fence. And so Churchill gets the job of going first, probably voluntary, maybe he drew a short straw. Goes and uses the outhouse, climbs over the top, and jumps outside the fence. He peeks back in, the other guys, and they're going, no, we don't have the guts to do it. And Churchill finds himself in the middle of Africa, just picture basically in the wilds of Africa by himself as a young man of 20 something. And eventually buries himself in a railroad car full of coal and makes his way to the coastline of Africa and makes his way back to England in the Boer War. And then, of course, he gets into politics. He's a war hero, just like Teddy Roosevelt. He works his way up through the British government, and he's a minister in the cabinet during World War One. But he's in charge of the Navy and gets blamed for a serious naval defeat at the Battle of Gallipoli, and so to punish himself, he volunteers for the trenches. So this is England's version of the guy that really knew what war was, really knew how horrifying World War One was, and after the war, his thesis was, don't throw your guns in the ocean. You need more guns. You need more ships. If you don't want a world war to happen again, you must be the most powerful country on Earth. And nobody was listening after the war to end all wars. And so when World War II starts and it turns out he's right about everything, they vote him back into office. And I went back to this slide because it's got the classic Churchill quote from the Battle of Britain. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender. If you want to hear Winston Churchill say that, YouTube the Iron Maiden song, Aces High, and you get to hear the speech, and you get to hear a cool Iron Maiden tune about the history of the Battle of Britain. Churchill is just an absolute bulldog, and the more England is bombed and bombed and bombed and bombed, the more he refuses to surrender. He secretly hopes that if England can hold out, eventually England's special friend America will come to save them. Hitler, Japan wrote off America's military power. We're isolationists. We've never done anything really strong. We beat up Mexico in 1846 through 48. We beat up Spain in 1898. We were in World War I 6 months compared to everybody else's 4 years. Churchill understands America a little bit better. He's a distant cousin of Franklin Roosevelt, actually, because Churchill's mom was from America. Churchill's mom was born right before the Civil War and grew up in the Civil War and gave Churchill a sense of when Americans are fired up, they are willing to fight hard and they are willing to die for a cause. Churchill just has to hold out long enough for America to find a reason to enter World War II. And I think you know what that reason is. So Churchill's inspiring England, don't quit, don't quit, don't quit, while the Germans are bombing and 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 bombing England. England discovers it has one little advantage. They had a particular airplane called the Spitfire. They didn't have as many planes as Germany, and they didn't have as many pilots as Germany, and they were losing planes and pilots fast. But their pilots did discover the Spitfire could do one thing better than German airplanes. It could make a tighter turn. If you just turned it as hard as you could, it turned faster than German airplanes. This is a simple PE lesson. All of you hopefully had enough PE to understand when you're running on the track, you always want to run on the inside lane of the track. In a distance race, the inside lane is actually a shorter circle than the outside lanes. So the basic advantage of the German the British Spitfire, it could turn a tighter turn radius than the German airplanes. Therefore, if the British pilots just went into a tight turn when they're being chased by the Germans, eventually they'll be behind the Germans and shoot them down. And they just start massacring German pilots. They could take on the German bombers especially and do immense damage to the German bombers. And this infuriates Hitler. Goering has convinced Hitler that we'll just bomb England into submission. And they're losing the Battle of Britain due to the Spitfire. And so, in Hitler's fury, probably his second great mistake of World War II, Hitler's fury, he shifts the bombing of military targets. He lays off the airplane factories, the ball bearing factories, and he lays off the airfields and the Spitfire pilots, and he takes the war to the British people, and they call it the Blitz. He starts bombing the schools, the nursing homes. He started targeting Jewish neighborhoods of London. In just pure fury and rage, he starts punishing the British people for not surrendering. I suppose he thought he could break the will of the British people But the military mistake there is England starts making more airplanes. They start making more ball bearings, more engines, more munitions, more machine guns, and they're able to drag this Battle of Britain on and on and on. It goes on for about a year, and that year is just long enough. America will get in the war, eventually. While the Battle of Britain is going on, though, Hitler makes his third greatest mistake. Since Goering has convinced him that England will surrender due to air bombing, his army isn't doing much. If he waits too long to invade Russia, Stalin's going to be ready for him, so he breaks the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact and invades Russia in June of 1941, and just blitzkriegs across Russia and just mows them down and mows them down and mows them down. The numbers are extraordinary. A great American pilot in World War II would have shot down 20-25 enemy airplanes. The German pilots were taking out 250 Russian airplanes on their kill list. The Russian technology just wasn't there. Stalin literally is not ready for this war, and somehow he is totally duped by Hitler. Stalin, this is like the biggest mistake of Stalin's career. He truly believed Hitler on the 10 years. He was surprised. His people had to tell him multiple times that the Germans were actually invading Russia. Stalin just didn't believe his friend Adolf Hitler would break his word, which is ridiculous for somebody as paranoid as Stalin. And the Germans just plow across Russia. They reach Leningrad, which is the old St. Petersburg in the north. They're on the outskirts of Moscow, which is the spiritual capital of Russia, and they drive on Stalingrad in the south, named after Joe Stalin, and that's where they start the epic battle of the Russian front. If Hitler can break through Stalingrad, he gets to the oil fields of Russia, which greatly help him. His pride is there. He doesn't want to lose. This is his epic championship battle of the German people versus the Russian people, and this is literally Hitler versus Stalin. Their egos get in the way, and they each just pour in hundreds of thousands more soldiers in the Battle of Stalingrad. It's just a massive slaughter, and neither one will give up, which means throughout 1941 and 1942, the Russians are just soaking up millions of German bullets. The winter, of course, sets in and slows Germany down, and it just becomes an epic power struggle of wills and ego. The Russians, they can easily soak up millions of German bullets. The Germans, of course, can just carry on and send in more soldiers and more soldiers and more soldiers. And the real point of this video is it's setting us up into a context more than anything of what it's like when America gets into the war. I don't even like this map, but it's here. I'm actually going to change maps because I can do that on technology. Wow, I bet this is incredibly boring. Remember this little gap of time when we talk about Richard Nixon debating John F. Kennedy in 1960. This map has the colors I need, which is a little bigger, but such is life. Let's just say the green represents Hitler after invading Russia. He's taken out the French, he's allied with Italy, so he's got all the central parts, he's conquered Poland, and then his armies sweep into all of Eastern Europe, into Russia. Because he's allied with Italy, they've taken this down here, French has fallen, so they get all the French colonies, and this leaves us an idea of how massively powerful Hitler was when he gets into the war. And look at your own map that you did for class. You can see this. By the time America gets into the war, Hitler he's steamrolling everybody. But he's made some mistakes that will cost him in the future. Next video is going to have a different setting. I'm getting tired of this whole setup. We'll do something for a change of scenery. Why are you still watching?